So let's take a look at some of the oldest miniatures for each Warhammer 40k faction, the oldest ones Games Workshop currently has on sale right now, and put them side by side with the latest miniatures to release for those armies. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're taking a look through the factions of Warhammer 40k and looking at some of their oldest and newest miniatures. For this one I mainly went via Lexicanum's list of each faction's miniatures. They're an online Warhammer 40k wiki that's maintained by fans, and their faction miniature lists have often been a pretty good resource when I'm making videos to find out what released when, and for a video I thought it could be fun to focus on these specifically, taking a look at some of the examples of the oldest and newest miniatures for each Warhammer 40k army. I'll leave their site linked down in the video description if you wanted to check it out. For this one I thought I'd put three categories of Warhammer 40k miniatures side by side, the oldest ones they have listed on their site, several of them from 40k's first edition that was rather different to the game since then take a look at the oldest miniatures that Games Workshop still has on sale for each faction, and then see what's happened to the faction in the most recent times, with the newest miniatures that Games Workshop's come out with at time of recording. This one's certainly a very big subject, I'm sure I'll miss some things or get some things wrong. For the older miniatures, they're certainly not quite as well documented on other areas of the internet, so we'll just be going by Lexicanum's list for them for the most part. Feel free to let us all know any other interesting things down in the comments though, in relation to any of these categories. Starting out with the Space Marines, and the oldest miniature that Lexicanum has on record here is this Imperial Space Marine, with his disintegrator type weapon with a bayonet. Apparently he hails back from 1985. There certainly has plenty of trappings of current day Astartes. We've got his sort of Corvus beaky helm, and big notable shoulder pauldrons, the one on the left having the bonding studs that became a feature of several armours. Games Workshop did a modern day remake of him for a limited edition collector's piece at one point. Otherwise some of the other earlier Space Marines was the RTB-1 plastic kit from 1987. Plenty of Marines in a similar sort of style there, and then having a bigger release wave of them in 1988. For their oldest current model in the range, I believe at this point it's the Land Raider. It seems that the current model for the regular Land Raider that is an online exclusive model at the moment comes from the year 2000, so 25 years ago, and quite a lot of other Firstborn armour dates from around that time, things like Rhinos and Predators following in 2002, with the updated sculpts for the Whirlwind and Razorback following on a little after that. Other slightly older miniatures within the range that haven't been replaced all that long ago are Lysander and the Terminator Assault Squad as well. It might be worth mentioning Pedro Cantor as well. Now off sale from the Games Workshop web store, though still has current rules in the codex. I believe he was one of the last Finecast resin models awaiting an update. Now Games Workshop have redone the character wave. He came a little after those previous ones in 2007. For the newest releases for the Space Marines, they've had quite a few recently. The Terminator Assault Squad and Terminator Ancient coming out in the Crux Terminatus box set in recent months, plus their recent wave of chapter-specific character releases, ones for Iron Hands and Salamanders and Friends, though the most recent out of those have been Marlius Calgar, the Victrix Honor Guards, and Cato Sicarius. There's certainly been a fair few characters that are just in the last few months have been updated from a very, very long time ago. For the very newest Space Marines though, we've got Captain Titus and his Wardens of Ultramar, Lieutenant Titus from the Space Marine 2 games now being reinstated as Captain of the Second Company, and backed up by his mentor, Brother Gadriel, and some mortal hangers-on to coordinate various aspects of his expansion. They're really quite unusual miniatures as Games Workshop goes, having quite such a close tie-in with Space Marine 2 and media, as well as being the inciting character for Games Workshop's upcoming 500 Worlds campaign, and whatever happens against the Necrons and other foes in that. For the Astra Militarum, the oldest models on Lexicanum appear to be squads of Imperial Guardsmen from 1987, and again feels like these guys have got some of the trappings of sort of more current Cadians, maybe a couple of the helmets kind of resembling them, and a few of the weapons looking fairly similar to lasguns. It looks like they've got a fair few other things like bolt pistols in the units. It's kind of fun that they've all got their own individual names for the sculpts as well. Another early one is this Ogren hero from 1988. I guess quite a lot of inflation has happened since almost 40 years ago, but times have certainly changed since Games Workshop charged £2 for a character style model. For the oldest current miniatures, it's the Kaschan Jungle Fighters. It seems that their kit hails from 1999, and I would probably argue they were perhaps one of the 40k kits that didn't look super great by the standard of their time, and haven't really aged particularly well since. They certainly communicate big Rambo men with big muscles on the table, I guess, though at the same time you can clearly tell that miniature making has come on a fair bit, and they have some of the more old-style heroic proportions with the great big hands. It is kind of surprising they made it quite this long without an update, even if it was a kill team kit potentially. They have done a few Kaschan sculpts in the not too very distant past to show us how it could be done. Otherwise I believe the Forge World Thunderbolt Heavy Fighter also hails from the year 2000, so it seems that that one isn't so very far behind. Again, maybe worth mentioning they have one of the last of the Finecast resin models in Sly Marbo too. He's from relatively recent history though, only coming out in 2017, one of the last Finecast resin kits to be released before they switched fully to plastic. And then for newer model releases for the Guard, technically it's the Hell's Last Command Squad for Minka Lesk and her advisors and characters that feature in the Hell's Last novel. They were just a limited edition item though, so are off sale in most places now. Otherwise, the most recent Guard releases are the new Krieg range, redoing the Forge World Krieg Regiment in some plastic and style. They were a particularly well received model range releasing in 2025, with their command squads, artillery team and Lord Marshal Dreyer at the front here. Before we move on to the other factions of Warhammer 40k, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Futureproof Modular Terrain, who wanted to share their rather fancy terrain sets with you. Basically the idea behind their stuff is that you have a battlefield made out of modular components, so you can take it all down and set it up in a different way if you'd like to. And it means that it builds ruins with a little bit of sculpted detail, but also you have the option to have it come pre-painted as well, which is kind of rare for terrain sets that aren't just smooth MDF. Here's a few real life pictures of the ruins that they sent me with a few of my models next to them. A World War Scheme one, a Shrine World, and a rather trippy looking Curse World style ruin. They've got quite a lot of different colour schemes to choose from. Their main offering is the Super Bundle full table set, generally priced at around $240 or $300-ish painted with the discount code here, so translating for a painted set at around about £240 or €290. As mentioned, they've got quite a lot of other colour schemes that you can take a look at. I quite like the Desert style one and the Lost World style one as well, they're also quite fun. In any case though, if you'd like to check out their stuff, they'll be linked down in the video description, and I'll cycle back to them briefly at the end of the video as well to talk through a bit more of their range. Thanks to them for sponsoring this one. Next up, we've got the Adeptus Mechanicus. While they became a more mainstream 40k faction in slightly more relatively recent history, they still have models that date back to Warhammer's earliest days. It looks like they've got some Castellan and Colossus robots and a Tech Priest going back to 1988. The Castellan style one certainly having some resemblance to the current 40k model. Looks like the Tech Priest has a staff hood and some cabling there. The faction only really became a mainstream one for Warhammer 40k in 2015 though. Initially they had a Skitarii release wave with a codex called Skitarii that launched with their troops, the Iron Strider, the Orange Dune Crawler and the Sicarians, though they followed that up with a Cult Mechanicus book fairly soon after that, with things like the Tech Priest Dominus and Electro Priests and Cataphorum Servitors. It did feel a bit on the weird side to have those separated out into two different codexes when they were releasing so close together. That was in the days far before Games Workshop did digital datasheet updates though. As a result, basically none of the Mechanicus models are really seen as all that old. I still say that their standard Skitarii troops are some of the coolest models in their range. For their newest models, they haven't had a huge amount of stuff over the past 6 years. They had a small release wave towards the end of 8th edition, but since then they've only had the Sidonian Scatros in 2023. People certainly were a bit divided as to how much they enjoyed Stilt Boy. Definitely a little bit on the silly and unusual side, but also quite fun I think. And then they had the Servitor Battleclade kit in 2025. Maybe not the single flashiest AdMech kit out there, though I feel like it's kind of necessary to add some standard Servitors back into the faction. It did feel weird to have the most common style of Servitor missing. For Sisters of Battle, the miniatures that Lexicanum lists seem to be a fair bit later in release dates versus plenty of armies that had a release wave during the first edition of 40k. Looks like a lot of their stuff came out in 1997 for the first time, including this Canoness and Seraphim, many of which will be on sale for a very long time after this, until they had their modern day refresh. The older version of the Immolator certainly had a very different vibe without quite so much ornate finery as well. Games Workshop had very little in the way of updates for the Sisters of Battle for around about 20 years after that. The first model getting redone for them was St. Celestine with the Gathering Storm sequence, having a release in the Triumvirate of the Imperium during the fall of Cadia, and is still among people's favourite models for the faction at the moment. Then eventually they got their major plastic refresh in 2020, initial Monopose launch box releasing alongside a limited edition sister model, and the vast majority of their current range dates from 2020. Some older things like some of the Misinostorum stuff stuck around for a while, though has eventually been moved to Legends with most of the rest of the Finecast range of 40k. For their newest models, after getting lots of releases in both 8th and 9th edition, they hadn't had so much in 10th. They got a Jump Canoness with their Codex, which did seem really quite a nice model that they were missing as a faction. The limited edition Celestian Sacrosanct Avalyn miniature was a particularly well regarded one, that one coming out alongside a Black Library novel. And they've had their Sanctifier kill team releasing alongside the World Eaters Goremongers for a fun band of Imperial Zealots led by a priest. We also got a preview of the future when we saw the Celestian Insidiants leak out. These are going to be a kill team kits that are coming next year for the faction, and are going to be first going on sale in the kill team box set facing off against a team of Raptors. It was perhaps surprising to see another flavour of Celestian that didn't have a ranged loadout like they classically did. These girls get some fun shadowy robes, and their thing is dealing with Psykers with a whole bunch of null maces as their main loadout. For the Adeptus Custodes, like the Mechanicus, they're mainly seen as a single force as the Guardians of Terror, and not really a 40k army in their own right for quite some time. though it does look like they have classic miniatures going back to the early days. This guy listed as a Custodian Guard from 1988, not really quite as big and chunky as his current counterparts, but still looks like he's got a fairly recognisable Guardian Spear, and the helm looks kind of similar to their current ones. Their current range is relatively new though as Warhammer 40K goes, getting their first 2 kits coming out in the Burning of Prospero in 2016 that had the Custodian Guard kit and the Sisters of Silence, so fairly modern miniatures there, and they're the oldest ones they have on sale at the moment. For their recent releases, they had a Blade Champion for 9th edition in 2021, first releasing in a box set versus the Genestealer Cults. I think he was quite a fun and fairly dynamic model. People were a bit less a fan of the Shield Captain option with the box set from 2024. Between the posing of the miniature and the way he's holding his weapons, plus the big cloak, it doesn't rather give the appearance of him being a bit rather square-shaped, though I would say the miniature does look a bit better in practice versus the angle they chose to photo him here. We know that some major releases for the Adeptus Custodes aren't going to be so very far away though. Games Workshop teased this plastic Guardian Spear for the Horus Heresy. They've now revealed the majority of things they teased at the start of the new Heresy edition, so perhaps there's a good chance they'll be along in the not too distant future. It likely means a fair bit of their Forge World resin range being converted to plastic, though there's at least some concern that Games Workshop might eventually put them into Legends like they did with the Space Marine Dreadnoughts for 40k who had the same thing happen to them. I guess only time will tell on that front. For the Imperial Knights, with every one of them being really quite big chunky models that Games Workshop just couldn't really make back in the early days, what they did have was Knights at epic scale though. I believe these ones being some Knights Errant with a big Melter style weapon and power fist there. They've got quite different proportions and stances compared with the more current Imperial Knights, but you can see the bunch of details that made it across into the newer models. The shoulder pads look really quite similar, and they do have the kind of lower faceplate thing going on, and the midriff seems fairly similar too. For their current range of models though, the Imperial Knights first released in 2014, and none of their kits have ever really been truly retired. It's just more that both the Imperial and Chaos Knights have had their kits extended a bit over the years. The first release for the Knights were the Knight Errant and Paladin back in 6th edition Warhammer 40k in 2014. This one built just a slightly more simplistic either battle cannon or thermal cannon knight, and didn't have the Gallant and Warden sprue that added a bunch of other bits, including a top carapace weapon mount and the option to swap out Chainsword versus Thunderstrike gauntlets. For a model that's entirely in its current state from release, there's a Knight Atropos as well. That's a full Forge World resin kit that hasn't been updated, and that hails from 2015. For the newest models for the Imperial Knights, the last release for them was the upgrade sprue that builds the Knight Defender, still adding on to that exact same base kit there, and this one giving it a big plasma gun and conversion beamer and a top mounted shield generator. It's not exactly an entirely new model though. For the latest complete new models, it's been the Acheron and Castigator released in 2023. These are 2 more of the conversions of Forge World Cerastus Knights to plastic. Hopefully the rest will follow at some stage. We've had them plus the Lancer so far, and all of them are sold in individual box sets. It was quite nice to see the big tall Cerastus Knights be just a bit more affordable. They're still some of the most expensive models that Games Workshop sells, but nothing really quite compared with their Forge World price. For the Knights of Tyson, again Grey Knights have existed since some of the early days of 40k. Here are some examples of their Demon Hunter style Terminators. It does seem that these ones are fighting with sort of Guardian Spears there, with bolters built into a power weapon. Interesting to see the one on the right painted up in a more sort of gold hue there as well. The main release that made them into a more well-rounded faction wasn't until 2003 though, with Codex Demon Hunters, which featured Grey Knights a lot more similar to what you might see today. Currently the Grey Knights have the main talking point that their models could do with an update to keep them in line with the Primaris. They don't exactly have a lot of unique kits, though there are 3 major plastic kits coming out in 2011, with the big multi-part Strike Squad that builds the other variants, and the Paladins or Terminators. For Grey Knights and the more divergent Space Marine chapters, you could argue it's still the Land Raider technically, given that that's an entry in their codex. That could technically be the model still on sale for most of them, so I'm going to focus on their unique units here. Until recently they had the standard Brother Captain on sale, who was metal then resin. Until his model going off sale in 2025, he would have been part of the 2003 release, which kind of shows just how long the Grey Knights have gone without an equivalent generic character release. They don't even have a proper model for the Brother Captain now, though fingers crossed for 11th edition. For their newer models, it's been incredibly sparse in recent history. There's only 2 Grey Knights miniatures they've had updated in the Primaris age. Castell and Crow was a pretty great example of what they could do at the new scaling though. Really quite a nicely done miniature with his cursed blades. And it was rather disappointing that in 2025 they just doubled down with an upgrade sprue for a Grandmaster and Dread Knight. It did add a few more fun wargear options, though I think people were hoping for some sort of new miniature, or more realistically an actual major release wave that has a bunch of characters and maybe some of the squads updated. Seems like they're probably odds on for 11th edition though. For the Imperial Agents, they've had various forms and names they've gone under throughout Games Workshop history, though I feel like their 10th edition name encapsulates the entire category pretty well. All the Inquisitors, Assassins, and various allied hangers-on that you might have throughout the Imperium. It seems there's a fair few of these Imperial oddballs dating back from 1st edition Warhammer 40k, including this Inquisitor here, a rather funky looking, big-headed navigator, and an astropath sculpt that looks really quite a fun one to me. It feels like that one holds up better than most from this era. For the current units in Codex Imperial Agents, there's plenty of things that would be older, more generic kits like the Rhino, the Chimera, or the Grey Knights Terminators. For actually looking at their unique miniatures that are on sale at the moment though, basically everything is at least relatively new. I believe the oldest models now are the Assassins that came out in Assassinorum Execution Force in a board game initially in 2015, and then were repackaged individually later. Until very recently, Inquisitor Cotias would have won though. His classic sculpt dates back to 2003. And again, I rate that as one of the ones that aged better than most over the years. I've got one of those in my collection. In the Codex, there's still rules for the standard Inquisitor model as well, which doesn't really have a current on-sale model, and as a result in artwork and unit profiles they've shown this one in its place a few times, if they haven't gone for one of the limited edition sculpts they did kind of recently, like Ostromandius or Cartavolnus. This or rather Spanish Inquisition style Inquisitor dates back to 2004. I guess perhaps they haven't chosen to release a generic one due to them all varying a fair bit and having their own styles of doing things, but it does feel like it's an obvious kit that's missing from the range. For more recent releases, for the Imperial Agents though, in 2024 we had Inquisitor Cotias redone unfortunately. Quite a few weird design choices on that model that had him voted as the least favourite miniature in the entire 40k range when I did a poll recently. There's Ostromandius out of the Warhammer Plus subscription miniature, and then in 2025 we've had 2 kill team units that can be fielded by them in the Sanctifiers and the Deathwatch veterans. Both of those can be used by other armies though, the Deathwatch themselves and the Sisters. Finally for the Imperium we've got the Divergent Chapter Space Marines, plenty of these having at least some representation from 1st edition Warhammer 40k. The Blood Angels have an all very golden armoured captain here, his pose in the golden armour very much feeling like Tycho's sculpt that followed him. It looks like they got some Death Company in 1994 with a Death Company chaplain and a bigger Death Company kit below him, before having a wider army release in 1996, I believe for the Angels of Death Codex. 10th edition seems to have been the edition of giving the Divergent chapters a big redo, and it means that most of the miniatures that came out in 2010 for the Blood Angels were fairly recently redone in 10th, the Bile Predator being the only surviving thing from that era, with its altered Predator chassis with Flamestorm or Assault Cannons. Probably worth noting Dante though, who had a pretty ancient sculpt for a very long time. His 1996 Firstborn sculpt, over 20 years before the advent of Primaris, only got around to being updated in 2023. Their new kits all basically hail from their release wave in 2024, coming out with the Death Company launch box first. I guess technically Lamartis and Astarath released just a touch before the rest of them. And we had new sculpts for a whole bunch of characters and the Sanguinary Guard, though unfortunately Games Workshop forgot the wings. It probably doesn't quite count, but this limited edition Genestealer seems to find some bits of Blood Angel's Terminator. He'll probably be quite ambitious to reformulate that into a full Space Marine though. For the Dark Angels, seems that they had a similar sort of trajectory, again getting a unique captain miniature with his company master sometime around 1990. He's got quite a fun fancy head crest there, and there's been a few miniatures that have had that similar sort of style going on later. And then it seems that after that they also had a major release with the Blood Angels with that Angels of Death Codex. For the oldest current models, Azrael and Dante had a similar sort of thing, both of their miniatures surviving an incredibly long time from 1996 up to Arks of Omen. But it does seem that the Dark Angels have one of the very oldest surviving miniatures in Warhammer 40k at the moment with Ezekiel. I believe he has the dubious honour of being the very last metal miniature in the current Warhammer 40k range. They either removed or updated the vast majority of things to Finecast, though he survived both. As sculpts from this kind of era go, he's really not a bad one, though certainly gets towered over a bit by nearby Primaris these days. Otherwise I believe that he predates the next oldest current Dark Angels miniature in Samael by around about 11 years, him and his jet bike having had the conversion to resin. For their newest miniatures, the Dark Angels got a pretty awesome release with their Deathwing in 2024, a resculpt of Grandmaster Belial, the Deathwing Knights, Chaplain Asmodai and the Inner Circle Companions. That seems kind of likely that we're going to have a similar sort of offering come out for 11th edition, or at least I'd be surprised if they didn't. Unless he turns up earlier, maybe that's when Ezekiel will get a redo. The model releases since then, you could argue that perhaps Strike Force Variel with the Warhammer Heroes blind buy boxes could be. I wouldn't really count them as Dark Angels models myself though. They're basically just absolutely standard Space Marines that are painted and marketed as Dark Angels, and there's no reason that you couldn't paint them up as any other chapter, as they don't have any themed bits at all. Next up, for their bitter rivals in the Sons of Ross, again they have plenty of miniatures dating back to the older days. It looks like Lexicanum has their earliest miniature declared as Leman Russ himself, fighting alongside the two wolves that he was famous to go with. I feel like that might have been in the days when Primarch lore wasn't really quite so well established though. Otherwise, there's a wolf lord from around 1991, looking like a similar kind of vibe to the Dark Angels and Blood Angels ones, and seems that they had their first bigger release wave in 1993, so a bit before the Blood Angels and Dark Angels. Here are some blood claws from that. For their oldest current models, Games Workshop did some bigger refreshes of them, both in 2012 and then 2016. A fair few of the 2012 and before units got updated kind of recently, and it seems that the two that survive from that era are the Fenrisian Wolves and the Thunderwolf Cavalry. They are firstborn miniatures though, which are very rapidly being phased out. I can't imagine they'll be surviving into the far future. Otherwise, for their pre-Primaris range still on sale, we've got the Wolfen, Iron Priest and Ulrich from 2016, plus Bjorn the Fell-Handed and the Dreadnought kits from 2014. For their newest miniatures, at time of recording, they have some of the very newest for Warhammer 40k. The Wolf Scouts just went up for pre-order and got their 40k datasheets, generally being pretty different to the other chapters Scouts as per their lore in the past, and this new version being in Phobos armour, and having quite a few fun specialists in there, including a demo guy and a rune priest. 2025 has been a big release wave for the Space Wolves though. We've had Logan Grimnar, several characters, plus 2 flavours of troops and Wolfguard. Again, like the Dark Angels and Blood Angels though, if their eventual plan is to replace all the firstborn models, there are still more kits to release. Next up we have the Black Templars, who came onto the scene a bit after those big 3 Divergent chapters from the past. One of their first recorded miniatures being this Marshal, but I'm not sure there's necessarily all that much Black Templar detailing on him. I painted up that miniature as a standard Space Marine captain myself. Otherwise though, they got a couple of character miniatures the following year, including Draco and a limited edition Emperor's Champion. The Black Templars went through a fair few years of kind of not really getting much support, though Games Workshop then decided to redo them all in a fair bit of style in 9th edition 40k and put them far more on the level playing field compared with the other major Divergent chapters. As a result, most of their unique miniatures date from then, with High Marshal Helbrecht, the Crusader Squad and the Sword Brethren, so most of their unique stuff no more than 4 years old. Again, like the other Space Marine chapters, you could say generic things like the Land Raider, and I guess they do technically have the Land Raider Crusader in their codex currently. That was a fair bit after the regular Land Raider, I want to say somewhere around the sort of 2009 mark or so, though I might be a few years out there. Despite them enjoying that variant, it's not really a unique Templar miniature though. For their more recent releases, 10th edition and the follow-on from their codex saw a couple of characters with an Execrated Chaplain and a Crusade Ancient, both quite fun miniatures in their own right, even if they might be kind of niche in game at the moment. They also got a particularly fun limited edition miniature in 2024 called Bayard's Revenge, with an Emperor's Champion slaying an Orc warboss. Finally, for the Imperium and the Divergent Space Marine chapters, we've got the Deathwatch. They weren't really developed as a major thing on their own right until relatively recently compared with the rest. The earliest miniatures Lexicanum has is this Kill Team upgrade pack from 2001 with a bunch of Xenomortis shoulder pads. It looks like they've got some fancier bolters than most as well. Looks like they're a metal upgrade pack for some plastic Space Marines. They had their own small range release just the wrong side of the big Primaris update in 2018. Their current range came out in 7th edition in 2016. First launching in Deathwatch Overkill versus the Genestealer Cults, but unfortunately Games Workshop aren't selling the Kill Team Cassius miniatures anymore. They were really quite fun ones. Their multi-part kits didn't follow too long after that though, and they still have Artemis, the Corvus Blackstar and the Watchmaster from this era, and the veterans, despite being off sale now, still have full rule support, even if they were updated to the Primaris style models. Perhaps as a result of their recent release, and being one of the least played 40k factions, Games Workshop has only just got around to giving them an updated Primaris squad, being sold as Kill Team Deathwatch. In this one you get 5 models with 1 Phobos guy and 1 Gravis, and most of the models are an either or of 2 different builds. It does mean they get lots of fun gear, though the datasheet is a rather complicated one, a bit weird not to have a base loadout for them. Moving on to the Chaos Marines, and like the Deity Legions that we'll see in a second, they've got plenty of older metal sculpts from around about the 1988 to 1999 sort of era. Miniatures so old they do share a bunch of features with the more modern day ones, that have quite a lot of things that look quite different. They've got some interesting kind of helms though, and the backpacks look sort of similar to the Chaos Marines that they evolved into. There's also an older style and all very chunky rounded Terminator here. It's showing the Eye of Horus, the 8-pointed star, a fun-looking demonic blade, and what looks like a whole bunch of bones and things on the front of his armour. It seems they had a bunch of individual model sculpts, and then a bigger release beyond that in 1996. The oldest current models for the Chaos Marines aren't really much younger than that. Perhaps the one that's most surprisingly survived to this day and age are the Chaos Biker miniatures from 1999. I must admit they've done rather well with the paint job, and putting him at a bit of an angle to make him look a bit more modern in this one. The sprue is a super simple one though, and definitely has a few more limitations of plastic miniatures of that era compared with what we have now. It feels fairly near guaranteed that Games Workshop will be releasing some new Chaos Bikers, at least sometime in the not too distant future for the Chaos Space Marines. They were rumoured to have been completed a long time ago, but didn't wind up turning up alongside all the other new stuff that rumour predicted. Otherwise, the Chaos Predator Rhino and Chaos Land Raider came from 2002, with the base of the Land Raider being the same as the Loyalist one from 2000, the Defiler was in 2003, and then they had plenty more releases that are still current in 2007. Like Dante and Azrael, the Abaddon model was only replaced around 6 years back as well, and his miniature was an old one from 1996. For the newest miniatures, after having major release waves in 8th and 9th edition, 10th edition has been a touch more quiet for the generic Chaos. There's been a Night Lord's upgrade sprue that was particularly well received, nice to see some individual Legion love in Warhammer 40k, and then the 10th edition Codex came alongside a couple of Chaos Lord resculpts, both one on foot and a jump one. It does seem that we have more Chaos Space Marines on the way soon though. New Raptors that can also be built as Warp Talons, releasing as the Kill Team Murder Wing. They're going to be coming in 2026 and look like they're packaged alongside the Chaos Lord here. There's several things in upcoming rumour engines that look rather Chaos as well, including this sort of medical gripper claw. It seems likely that there's going to be at least some stuff for the Chaos Space Marines, and the internet's been talking about recent rumours of Huron Blackheart and maybe some Red Corsairs to go with. For the Deity Legions, the Death Guard have some Nurgle Renegades from 1988, the one on the left in particular really seeming to capture the theme of the Plague Marines that they turned into. It's interesting to see the development in just the early days as well. The Plague Marine released in 1991 is already looking really quite a lot sharper. I thought, just as an extra aside, I always find the epic scale Demon Primarchs kind of fun as things from a very long time ago to represent some major characters in the lore today. Mortarion here is more being an angel of death, looking a bit more gaunt with a great big scythe, as opposed to the bloated being from the current setting. For their current range, Games Workshop left most of the Deity Legions undeveloped for a very long time, until eventually getting around to revisiting them in big style. Death Guard came out with the Dark Imperium launch set for 8th edition in 2017. I guess technically for the first releases that came out with that, there's still sprues from Dark Imperium that were on sale later, including the Malignant Plague Caster. Then they followed up with a wider Death Guard release with a lot more multi-part plastic kits for them, including things like these Black Lord Terminators and the Demon Primarch himself. Basically, Death Guard have had one enormous release wave, and then just a few token things since. We had the Lord of Virulence in 2021, alongside their Miasmic Malignifier fortification, and we got the Lord of Poxes in 2025, both of which were kind of fun as they've been teased in the lore right from the start when the Death Guard came out, showing us that Games Workshop planned these things out editions in advance. For their Khornate rivals and the other Deity Legions, they follow a similar sort of path. They've also got some Khornate Renegades from 1988. This one's got a very bloodletter looking head and what looks like a sort of chainsaw tail thing going on. The ones on the right are sold as a set of World Eaters, definitely all very red and angry looking Chaos Space Marines, though with quite a different aesthetic to today. And then we have a 1991 model that looks a lot more similar to the current era Khorne Berserkers. I do like epic scale Angron as well, painted up as an all very bright red demon. Their model refresh had Khan the Betrayer precede them by really quite a number of years. He released in 2016 and is their oldest unique miniature. He came out not so very long before the Gathering Storm and Ford of Cadia sequence and the Dawn of the Primaris. Besides him though, basically the rest of their range mainly dates from 2023, where we had Angron, Khorne Berserkers and a few other releases alongside, turning them from a sub-faction of Chaos Space Marines into an army that stands more on its own 2 feet. Perhaps worth mentioning a few of the older Khornate Super Heavies that are still on sale. Forge World had the Brass Scorpion from 2010, the Khorne Lord of Skulls is from 2013, though both of these could be fielded by Chaos Space Marine armies in general, so perhaps aren't exactly World Eaters unique only. The Brass Scorpion is now Legends for Warhammer 40k as well. For their newest models, people were hoping for a more major release wave to follow up the first one, though it seems that Games Workshop just gave them a token character release with the Slaughterbound, a slightly bigger 8-bound guy possessed by a Bloodthirster, and they also got a different flavour of their Jackals as well, with the Goremongers being sort of worshippers of bloodletters and bounding forward on their augmented legs. Like the Death Guard, it does seem that Games Workshop have teased the name of at least one character far in advance to make extensive reference to a Berserker Surgeon in the lore. I guess we'll get one of those at some point, and it seems to have become established enough that people are even taking time to put Photoshop edits out there. We had that all rather creative Photoshop leaks for them recently. For Tzeentch's Legion of the Thousand Suns, again they have some Tzeentch Renegades from 1988. These ones may be going down a bit more of the sort of mutated Tzeentch kind of look. Looks like they're hovering forward on some sort of mutated thing instead of their legs. At least I'm getting that as opposed to some very narrow legs under a cloak or something. Epic Scale Magnus maybe isn't looking quite so intimidating as some of them. appearing as a winged blue dwarf cyclops as opposed to the red-skinned monster that we know today. It's just kind of funny that coming from a similar sort of era, the Rubric Marine on the right looks so much more developed and more recognisable for how you'd imagine it today. It looks like a pretty awesome miniature even by today's standards. For the oldest unique things in their range at the moment, the current one that they have is the Mutalith Vortex Beast from 2013. That was initially released as a sort of unchained monster beast for End Times and Age of Sigmar, that was ported to the Thousand Suns range at a later date after their main release wave in 2016. That's when the majority of their units came out, and the Zangors were added as they released for Age of Sigmar as well. So beyond the Mutalith, basically all their unique stuff is from then, and it does mean that out of the Deity Legions they now have the oldest range. They are an army that's seen some pretty minimal releases in recent times, just getting the one token thing in 9th and 10th edition, the Infernal Master in 2021 fighting the Grey Knights in the Hexfire box set initially. I do quite like his little summon screamers. And then in 2025 they've had their Sekitar robots, psychic robot Egyptian statues that stand as sentinels. I feel like the lore is quite fun for them, though people had a bit of a mixed reaction to their looks. Then finally for the Deity Legions we have the Emperor's Children. Their initial squad releases on the right in 1988 are in a whole kaleidoscope of different colours which I'm sure would please Slaanesh. There's definitely a few of their lurid pink hues in there, but also all manner of other stuff as well. In 1991 it looks like that was followed up by the Emperor's Children Marine and the Noise Marine with his guitar type sonic weapon. That's the one that they redid as a limited edition sculpt in the fairly recent past. Like the rest, the Emperor's Children Marine on the left from 1991 here resembles a lot more of the faction that we know today. Feels like the reimagination of those Tormentors and Infractors has some nods to that. The Emperor's Children got their big release and redo in 2025. Before then they didn't really have a range, but until very recently their miniatures would have been very old indeed. Lucius the Eternal's miniature came from 2006. It certainly felt to me like one of the miniatures that hadn't aged quite so well from that kind of era. And as a partial kit, the official way to get Noise Marines was this upgrade pack coming from all the way back in 2002 and designed for a completely different Chaos Space Marine kit. With the faction being the newest one for Warhammer 40K though, at current time of recording everything came out at the same time in 2025. I guess technically the Champions of Slaanesh box set coming out very slightly before, so I guess technically their most recent miniatures are the ones that didn't come from that, like Fulgrim and Lucius the Eternal and the others. In general, Emperor's Children fans seemed really quite happy with the release wave, with Fulgrim, Lucius the Eternal and the Noise Marines all being the models that were perhaps some of the most enjoyed, which I think is fairly feels good given that they were the staples of the faction that you'd really hope they'd get right. For the beings of the warp, the Chaos Demons look like they've been around since the very start, and having really quite a wide representation of their different forms from 1988. All the major deities having both lesser and greater demons there. Looks like we've got a blue horror, a plague bearer that's marked as a lesser demon of Nurgle, a bull-headed and all very disturbing keeper of secrets with some studded leather going on, and a bloodletter of Khorne with some particularly weird looking elongated limbs there. There's quite a lot of models for that era. Their demons range has generally been one that's had a presence both in the Warhammer Fantasy setting and in 40k. Chaos Demons were often fielded just as part of the more broader Chaos and Codex Chaos Space Marines, and got more formally split off into their own codex for Warhammer 40k in 2008, and now there's just a few of the demons that they have on sale that came out at that initial release wave. The Bloodletters of Khorne, the Demonettes, I believe the Seekers and the Soul Grinder are all from then, with a fairly vast amount of other stuff being redone or released over the next 5 years after that. While I feel like they're maybe not as desperately bad as some of the older models, I feel like most of them are ones that Games Workshop could probably improve on with another go. There's also a couple of models that still have rules from that era but have been taken off sale, things like Epidemius and the Skullmaster that were initially released in metal. They probably seem like they're on borrowed time until Games Workshop winds up updating the Demons Index again, as they're not on sale unless they have some sort of surprise big Demons release. They're quite likely to go Legends. After having 10 years of really quite remarkably consistent releases, mainline Demon releases went a bit quiet all the way after 2019 when they had a major Khorne and Slaanesh one. Since then it feels like it's more been sort of unaligned demons of various different flavours. For Warhammer 40k purposes, Be'lakor perhaps being the last proper, undisputably Chaos Demon kit that's come out. He was a particularly well received model of a Demon Prince miniature that came out a long time ago and featured a Fun Fallen Primaris on his base. And then in 2023, releasing quite close to each other, we had the Demon Prince that was quite a big multi-purpose one that both works for Age of Sigmar and 40k. And it's also the one that you use for both the core Chaos Marines and all the Deity Legions. He has different heads to dedicate him to the different deities. And then in 2023 we also had Vashtor the Archifane as well, who essentially is a Chaos Demon but aligns to himself rather than the other deities, and for that reason they've chosen to put him in Codex Chaos Space Marines at the moment. I guess maybe eventually he'll move to a Dark Mechanicum style codex if and when they release one. It's kind of notable that Demons have got no dedicated release for 10th edition, unlike the vast majority of other factions. Even the Deathwatch got something. Games Workshop chose not to release a codex for them, so they didn't even get a token thing, and that choice could certainly imply they might be splitting them up and putting them into the different Deity Legion codexes as the way forward from now. We probably won't know that for certain until 11th edition though. Finally, for the Forces of Chaos, we have the Chaos Knights. Like their Imperial counterparts, they don't really have two old standard models. It looks like on the epic scale they've got these Hellscourge Demon Knight style things. They look completely different to anything that we have today. And then for the first proper Chaos Knight bits in Warhammer 40k, Forge World released an resin upgrade sprue for the standard Imperial Knight kit in 2015, giving them some all very spiky and corrupted armour that's got a lot of overlap with the ones that came later. For their oldest current model though, it depends whether or not you go for the generic one. As mentioned, we had the Errant and Paladin kit released in 2014. That's been updated since, but again you use it for the Knight Despoiler in Codex Chaos Knights. If you actually count kits that are actually dedicated to Chaos Knights and Chaos Knights only though, it'd be the Knight Rampager and Desecrator kit from 2019. Again, one that started out as just one core kit and has been expanded over the years. For their newest models, again it really depends on what you count. The newest full-on Chaos Knight kit is the War Dog kit, so one of the only other two Chaos Knight kits that you have. The newest full kit that could be used by either Imperials and Chaos are the Castigator and Acheron. Their appearance is definitely a lot more uncorrupted and Imperial in nature compared with the 40k Chaos Knight range though. And then their newest sprue release is the 2025 Ruinator sprue, added into their Abhorrent class Knight box set, and giving you a great big flamethrower, some missiles, and a Felbor siege drill. It feels nice enough as an extra war gear option, though maybe not quite as exciting as if they've released an entire full knight. I feel like the War Dogs as a kit to expand the range were a particularly nicely well done one. A cool appearance that you can customise quite a lot with their faceplates, and lots of war gear. Moving on to Xenos, and quite a few of these go back a really long way. The Aeldari were previously the Eldar, and then seemingly before that, in 1987 they were being sold as Space Elves, looking like they're mainly fighting as a squad of mainly one-handed chunky pistol type things here, though their armour still fits in with the kind of feel of the Aeldari today. They had quite a big release wave with a bunch of stuff in 1988, amongst them being this take on the Aeldari jet bike. It is pretty funny that most of that is fairly similar to what we have now. It just feels like the entire back part of the bike is missing with the fins and engine. I just find it kind of funny that that bit's just entirely gone, while the front of it is quite so similar to today's Wind Riders. It seems that the Aeldari have lost the title of the army that has the single oldest model since the Warp Spiders were redone. They had Warp Spiders from 1994, and only just this year had them updated to plastic alongside Phoenix Lords, though I must admit as miniatures go I don't really blame Games Workshop for being particularly slow to update them. Compared with other miniatures of the era, I feel like lots of the sculpts were really nice. They're definitely much improved now though, quite nice to have a multi-part plastic kit rather than resin and metal, with those either updated or taken off sale in the case of Karandra sadly. That leaves the Viper jet bike from 1997 looking like it's the single oldest miniature now. And again, with the sort of sleek design, I don't really feel like that holds up too badly. Again, at least compared with the vast majority of other things from that age of miniature production. I think I've seen people discussing rumours that might be updated in the near future, maybe alongside this rumoured Corsairs wave that Chapter Master Valric had mentioned. Beyond the Viper, looks like it's the Falcon Grav tank as the other oldest Aeldari miniature. That one's from 2005, so I guess about 20 years old now. And again, personally, I wouldn't really be in a rush to update that. Feels like it does the job absolutely fine. They did choose to update the Fire Prism though, due to that one initially having a metal component. As mentioned, their newest miniatures are pretty recent. They had their big Aspect release wave in 2025. The vast majority of the Aspect warriors that had waited patiently for a very, very long time finally getting redone in plastic, most of the sculpts being really nice ones. I was quite fond to get a new Phoenix Lord added in with Lycus as well for the Warp Spiders. Since then we've just had the one other Aeldari release in Infinity's Lament, this one with a Spirit Seer retrieving a Spirit Stone from a downed Wraith Lord. It's the Warhammer Plus subscriber miniature for a year, and feels like quite a nice little diorama compared with a few of them that we've had in the past. While we're on Aeldari, I'll mention the Harlequins as well. Not really treated as a full faction in their own right by Games Workshop, though they're also an army that goes back a fair way. It seems they've got plenty of miniatures that date back to 1988, including this guy called the Great Avatar, who essentially looks like a troop master for them back then, and a different take on those very similar jet bikes that don't have the back section yet, in the shape of a great big grinning Harlequin's face. All their current miniatures got released in 2015. It was nice to see plastic miniatures for them, Games Workshop updating from the miniatures that had previously been released in metal originally, and that added some new choices such as their Starweaver transports and Skyweaver jet bikes, expanding them into a mini army that enjoyed full faction status for a while, before now being a sort of an allied faction once again. Over the past 10 years though, there's pretty well been nothing for the Harlequins. The only miniature that came out was Kaiganil. He released in 2020 paired with the Demonofuge. While you could use him as maybe a troop master or solitaire or something, it's not fielded rules as written for the Harlequins but the Sisters of Battle instead. It will be fun to see some new miniatures for them at some stage. Perhaps something like a true avatar of the Laughing God. I've had a unit called Mimes mentioned really quite a lot of times in the lore. For the Dark Eldar, looks like their early day sculpts aren't quite so common as their Craft World counterparts. Lexicanum does list a Dark Elf Space Trooper from 1987. Maybe not looking so very different from standard Eldar or Space Elf models there. I'm not entirely sure what gun he's got. Otherwise, they had their big release wave in 1998 for 3rd edition 40k. Dark Eldar featured facing off against the Space Marines in the Launch Battle Force box set for that edition. It had their Cabalite Warrior plastic sprue, and then along with that, they had plenty of their other unique units, such as the Grotesques and the Incubi here, plus their Raider. Then they didn't really have much in the way of releases for quite some time, before Games Workshop basically just completely wholesale redid the entire range in 2010. Really quite a big effort release, and I feel like it came at a fairly good time after a significant upgrade in the quality of their plastics kits. So you have lots of things that date from that era, things like the Venom Transport, the Kronos and Talos, or the Cabalite Warriors, and lots more. Again, compared with other 40k kits that are similarly old, I feel like the Drukhari kits have really stood the test of time, and while the resin and finecast ones weren't really particularly fit for purpose, the plastic ones still do well today. For their newest miniatures, they've had Mandrakes, Incubi, Drazar and Lilith Hesperax in the not too distant past. They certainly haven't had a major release wave in quite some time though. People are certainly hoping that 10th edition might have been their time, given that there's plenty of finecast kits that have just completely gone away and now been sent to Legends, but maybe Games Workshop will help out the Drukhari in the next one. They did get a couple of fairly nice Archon kits as a consolation prize. It was nice to see the standard Archon redeveloped into a proper plastic kit, and Lady Malice having an official miniature was quite fun as well. One of the characters in the lore that had some in-game rules, but never had an official model before now. Hopefully Games Workshop get around to returning things like Grotesques, Urian Rakarth and the Beast Packs to the range. It is weird to see them just completely absent, given that they were present in the 1998 release. They've been staples of the faction. For the Tyranids, some of their earliest models are their sort of Zote messengers. It looks like they've got some earlier Tyranids called Hunter Slayers type here. Really quite warped and odd looking compared with Tyranids today. Though they certainly have the overall look and feel of the Tyranid termagants that it seems they became. Zotes aren't really a major thing in the 40k galaxy anymore, aside from one turning up in Blackstone Fortress. The hive mind more being a mysterious and all-consuming force of nature. I guess if they have emissaries, it'd be more the Genestealer Cults now. The Tyranids had an absolutely enormous range refresh for Leviathan in 10th edition, and that's meant that the vast majority of their early kits got updated, including plenty of things that were in finecast resin, some of which were in metal originally. We've had new versions of the Genestealers and the Lictor, though it still looks like the oldest model might be the Carnifex for a full kit at the moment, the model for the main Tyranid sort of living battle tank sort of creature. That's all the way back from 2005. It still maybe doesn't really feel all that far behind the curve as Tyranid models go, but I could still imagine a resculpt of it being interesting. Otherwise, as best I can tell, apparently the warrior main bodies came from back in 2002 and haven't changed since. And to my understanding from what people have said online, it sounds like they had an updated weapon frame from 2014. So I guess if that's right, you could argue that they've got a good claim to fame to being the oldest Tyranid models in the range as well. After I've seen the new Prime on foot and the Winged Prime, I do wonder whether Tyranid warriors might be one of the next on the checklist. Will be cool to see them redone or some Shrikes. Otherwise, if counting Forge World models as well, the Harridan is a miniature dating back from 2002, and that's still on full sale, so I guess that would win as the Tyranid one. The Hierophant Biotitan being the other one that's still got more current 40k rules at the moment, and that came 3 years later. Owning the oldest Tyranid would certainly set you back a fair bit though. It costs over $500 or £300 from the Games Workshop web store. For their most recent miniatures, most of their updates came from the start of 10th edition with Leviathan. Since then, they've had some new Raveners in a Kill Team set though, painted up in the colour scheme of Hive Fleet Typhon here. They're really quite fun dynamic models, being able to be fielded as more standard warriors or the ones with the fancy enhancements here. And then revealed for a late edition release for the Tyranids apparently is a Prime with Lash Whip, maybe a little bit of an unexpected and oddball release for the end of the edition. He certainly feels like a bit more of a natural leader for the warriors, given that he doesn't have wings that are going to be slowed down by an on-foot squad. Next up, the Genestealer Cults seem to have been around about as long as the Tyranids. These cultists with the big craniums have been around since 1989. There's a Magus here that really doesn't feel so very dissimilar to the ones today, plus hybrids of different variations, one looking more like a neophyte, and then one a far more mutated acolyte style one. It seems they've also got some pure strain Genestealers from this time as well, and again feeling very similar to current ones design wise, even if it is in a bit more of a clunky and old school way. Genestealer Cult went away as an army for many years, with Games Workshop just not supporting them, and then brought them back with Deathwatch Overkill. From that release there were quite a lot of monopose hybrids they had, that they kept around the monopose plastic characters, with the Patriarch Magus and Primus making up the Brood Coven kit that's still on sale, giving you quite a nice little command structure with Alpha Commander of the cult plus his higher up minions. Plenty of the rest of the range released later in the year as multi-part plastic kits though, including the Neophytes, Acolytes and Goliath trucks. Then for their newest models, the 10th edition miniatures for the Genestealer Cults were the Benefactors, with the big sort of human zoanthrope hybrid, frying some tanks with some big brain blasts, and the Brood Brothers got an upgrade sprue for the Cadian shock troops as well, more giving flavour than anything else. For some reason Games Workshop has chosen not to give these guys a datasheet, even if they don't really map on particularly perfectly with any of the Guard units. Then in 2025 they have had a couple of limited edition miniatures, Games Workshop deciding to go Genestealer Cult this year apparently, an alternative Sculpt Primus, and that crouching Genestealer cradling a Blood Angel's Terminator head called Biosan's Terminators. That one feels all very Space Hulk, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of people very excited if they chose to bring that board game back. For the Necrons, they were a little later development for Warhammer 40K, having a bunch of miniatures released in 1998. Here we have an old school Necron warrior on the right here, an all very Egyptian lord with the sort of metallic cloak that the current ones still have as well. And on the left we have the early version of the Locust Destroyers. This one has a bit more of an appearance of a piloted jet bike compared with the Locust ones that we have today. The Necrons then had their more mainstream major plastic release wave in 2002, and several of those miniatures are current Necron miniatures to this day. The Locust Destroyer with the last holdout of the green Gauss rods has felt like an obvious one they're probably going to update at some point sooner or later. They did the Locust Heavy Destroyer for 9th edition 40k, but now 5 years have gone by and they haven't updated the more standard one. We've also got the Destroyer Lord as well, which is now off sale, though it still has rules. This guy did get an alternative build with a Warscythe one a bit later than this though. And then of course we have the 2 C'tan. Both of those are still on sale and getting rather dwarfed by the Void Dragon at the moment. The Nightbringer is going to be updated in the not too distant future, though Games Workshop hasn't told us anything about the Deceiver, at least not yet. It's probably also worth mentioning Trazyn the Infinite as the last surviving resin Necron model. He was from 2012 and there's several other plastic kits that are from a similar sort of era. All the other named characters that came out with resin models at that time though are now gone. Necrons had their big release wave for 9th edition 40k with loads of kits redone or new units added then. Since then we had 3 character releases towards the start of 10th edition, though more have come since that. Their latest model kit that's only just gone on individual sale are the Canoptek Circle, a Geomancer Cryptek accompanied by a whole host of Canoptek constructs. And then announced recently we've got the C'tan Shard of the Nightbringer that looks like it's going to have a starring role going up against Captain Titus in the upcoming narrative, and that's going to be releasing at a similar sort of time to Necrosaur Amontar, a Destroyer Lord character who looks like an Ophidian Destroyer. Apparently he's the origin of the Destroyer Curse and has the eventual ambition to put the C'tan Shards of the Nightbringer back together to help him destroy all life. Both of those feel like pretty awesome resculpts. I'm sure lots of people will be looking forward to getting their hands on that Nightbringer model. For the Leagues of Votann, they've only recently returned to the scene. The previous squats were at the start of Warhammer 40k though, being the Space Dwarf sort of trope in the same way that we had the Space Elf Eldar. I believe their miniatures were also from around about 1988. It looks like they've got a big set of squat warriors here. There's a rather chunky looking egg-shaped exo-armor guy. And then they also had mole grenade things and trikes, as you can see here. Many of these are both being readapted with similar sort of things released for Necromunda and also transformed into the Votann sort of aesthetic for 40k. I'll not focus on the Necromunda stuff here. They do have their Ironhead Squat Prospectors, but given that the Leagues of Votann really haven't been on the scene for so very long in their current form, the vast majority of their range either dates back from 2022 or their recent second wave of kits over the last few months. I guess technically the very oldest will be the ones that came out in the launch box once again, so the Carl plus Ironhair Champion Hearthkin Warriors and the Hernkin Pioneers. For their newest miniatures that are currently on sale, it was the 2025 release wave, giving them things like the Ironkin Steeljacks, the Memnir Strategist, Buri Egnerson, the Tyranid Slayer, and the Capricus Hernkin Transport. Games Workshop haven't taken too long to announce another thing for the Votann though. It looks like they're getting an Orc Slayer called Berek Stormbrow, a Chthonian Berserk character with bionic hands, and a great big hammer plasma size style thing. For the Orks, it looks like Lexicanum has got some seriously old things on record here, from around about 1986 to 87. There's a Space Orc with an axe here, a bazooka crew selling 3 metal models for £2, and an Orc on a bike that apparently is called a Sleazy Rider. These ones do feel a bit more different than most to the current 40k range. They do have the sort of hunched slouch position, and the big jutting teeth from the lower jaw on this guy here. These ones certainly feel like ones from the fairly distant past. For the oldest current Games Workshop models, really quite a good chunk of them were from 2008. Orks had quite a lot of models for the 5th edition sort of era, so Boys, the Weird Boy, the War Bikers, Looters and Burners, and the Truck all come from here. And feels like if they are going to do a major Ork refresh for 11th edition, as seems to be rumoured, I really wouldn't be too surprised to see multiple ones of these get new sculpts. Otherwise, Mad Doc Grotznick from 2000 with an older sculpt was around until relatively recently. I'm sure there's plenty of people who'd happily see him return to the range in style. He did get a novel written in the not too distant past. Otherwise though, technically their oldest miniature might be the Gargantuan Squigoth from the Forge World range. It looks like this one's back from 2002 and really is quite a fun one. It will be really cool to see something of this sort of size and stature done as a plastic kit. Otherwise, for new miniatures, they had their Beastnagger release wave in 9th edition. Their 10th edition main codex model was the Big Mech from last year, and beyond that they've had the Bad Moon Off-Tank Black Hawk limited release miniature, the Tank Busters from the Kill Team set, and technically the newest miniatures for them will be the Red Gobbo Christmas ones, with the Snowman and the sort of Nutcracker Vostro and Tim Boy thing from this year. If they do wind up being the antagonist faction of 11th edition, then it's going to be a good time for the greenskins fairly soon though. I guess technically we do know one Orc miniature that's coming out soon, though I feel like the Pain Boys would have a bit of a job putting him back together. Finally, for the Tau Empire, they were one of the last kind of truly new factions added to Warhammer 40k that didn't have so much precedent before. Their race was introduced as a bright, young and expansionist race in 2001, and Games Workshop gave them a rather big release wave, around 21 kits in total, including plenty of plastic ones like Fire Warriors and the Crisis Battlesuit, plus ones that have since been updated like this Ethereal and the Stealth Suits. They've had 2 different plastic kits come out since. The oldest current Tau miniatures are from this very same release though, and they have both the Devilfish and the Hammerhead gunship from this time. The Hammerhead did get some bits released later to give you the option to either build that or the Skyray. Again, compared with some things, I feel like the vehicle kits hold up pretty well really. Their design's a rather unique one, and maybe having very slightly less precise model details isn't exactly the worst for a bigger kit like this. Much of the Kroot range would have also been here as well, but they got updated last year with quite a lot of miniatures coming out for them. For their newest miniatures, they've just had the Stealth Suits go up for pre-order with the rules available for them. They updated the slightly chunkier XV25 ones, though are fairly similar overall in terms of their loadout and unit function. It might take a lot of Tau players a while to actually get them though, given that the Kill Team box sold out so fast. As well as them getting an individual release though, we know that there's going to be another Battlesuit character set coming out, and this one's called the Twin Lance with their own variant on the Crisis suit. A dual set of characters to represent Montcar for the Tau Empire, one armed with a big fusion gun and one with an ion weapon plus some fancy shields. Apparently their thing is to jump into the heart of the enemy and destroy something before flying swiftly away. It seems that we might not be entirely done with Kroot though. A couple of rumour engines certainly look like they're probably a Kroot character, maybe one that's mounted on a Kroot Ox or some other beastie. I'd guess if we're getting rumour engines for that, then there's a good chance that it comes out alongside the end edition campaign, though I guess we'll see. Let me know your thoughts on all these models, old and new though. I look forward to hearing your takes in the comments, and any of the interesting examples that I've no doubt missed in making this one, I look forward to hearing your takes down in the comments below. Feel free to subscribe if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming as often as I can. That's about it for this one, though before I go I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor, Futureproof Modular Terrain once more, with their fairly flexible plastic ruin sets. I feel like for checking the boxes for functional 40k terrain, their sets do rather well. Being able to build different sizes and shapes of ruin with them are quite nice. They've actually got some sculpted texture and detail, unlike a bunch of MDF things, and you don't have to glue them in place, so you can reconfigure and rebuild them into a different thing. Say if you wanted to rebuild a battlefield for a narrative reason, or adapt to the next set of tournament terrain that comes out. It's fairly unusual for a terrain set to have the option to come pre-painted like this as well, which might be a nice advantage if you don't have tons of time to hobby up a set of it. Between all that, I feel like it checks a lot of boxes that you might want out of a terrain set. Perhaps for any downsides, it is a bit pricier than a fair few of the MDF style offerings. It's not really aiming at the bottom end of the market. Perhaps for any other criticisms, while you can reconfigure it, it would take a little bit of time to do and wouldn't be something I'd want to do on the regular personally. And depending on the exact sort of ruins that you try and build, you might have a bit of a mismatch between the amount of ruin walls and the top bits for it, and it might tempt a fair few people to go by their suggested terrain layouts for it. I still say there's lots to like about it though. In general, the sets are made out of these core bits and then expansions for the roof bits. And their main offering is this full table set, currently at around $240 or $300 painted. That's with the discount code linked in the video description. So painted costs around about £240 or €290. Check them out, links down in the video description if you'd like to take a look at the various different options and the different ways that you can have it painted. As mentioned, they've got things like Desert Worlds, Royal Worlds, World War style ones with a sandbag style effect, or a rather trippy looking Cursed World. In any case, thanks to them for sponsoring the video. You can find them links down below. That's about it for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this, or support the channel on Patreon if you want to keep these coming. Channel patrons get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the monthly prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.